Hello, friends. Are you watching this alone or with someone? Tell me in the comments.
It was sometime around the second week of November when I heard it. Half a sentence, muffled through the thin drywall of my mom's hallway. The kind of throwaway comment you're not supposed to hear. Not because it's whispered or private, but because people assume you're irrelevant enough not to be in earshot. "We just want a peaceful holiday this year," Melissa had said, her voice lined with a sweet, saccharine exhaustion that always made her sound like the victim, even when she was the one holding the knife. I was standing in the guest bathroom with the door cracked, digging through the cabinet for something for my sinus headache, when those words slid through the air and sliced into something inside me that I didn't even realize had still been bleeding. It wasn't just the tone that hit me, it was the context. I hadn't been invited to anything. There'd been no group text, no shared calendar, no family call to coordinate flights or what sides to bring for dinner. For the past 10 years, I had covered half the costs of our family Thanksgiving trips. Not because anyone asked me to, but because someone had to. And Melissa and Tom were always tight this year. And Mom's Social Security didn't stretch the way it used to. So I'd foot the Airbnb, the car rentals, sometimes even groceries. But this year, silence. I didn't get a maybe. I didn't even get a lie. I just got erased. They didn't know I was still in the house. I'd stopped by Mom's to drop off her prescription and a new heating pad since hers had burned out. I was on my way back to my condo in Phoenix after a client meeting when she texted that her back was flaring again. So I did what I always do. I picked up the slack, no questions asked. And that's when I heard them. Melissa and Mom in the kitchen, talking like high school girls plotting around a cafeteria table, giggling about how much more relaxed it'll be this year without all the tension. And you know what? I didn't barge in, I didn't make a scene, or slam a door, or cry in my car. I just took the heating pad, placed it neatly on the dining table where I knew Mom would find it, and walked out, quietly, calmly, with that same controlled smile I'd worn for years, the one that says, "Sure, I'll swallow my pride, again." But I didn't go home. I drove to the coffee shop I used to hide in during my divorce, an ugly little strip mall joint with chipped tables and the best goddamn Wi-Fi in the county. And I opened my laptop. I wasn't even sure what I was doing at first. Maybe I just needed to feel in control of something. But the moment I saw my online banking dashboard, a sharp clarity settled in my chest like steel. I looked at the auto pay list, insurance, tuition, the shared family phone plan, and realized I had more power than they remembered. Over the years, one favor at a time, I'd become the unpaid CFO of this family. When Melissa decided to take a break from work after Grace was born and never went back, I covered the kids' school expenses, starting with a temporary laptop for Aiden in 8th grade and ending with full tuition installments to the community college he was now attending. I wasn't their mother, but I played one in the financial drama. They all silently expected me to bankroll. Tom had his moments. He'd Venmo me $100 here and there with a guilt-ridden thank you. But mostly, they let me pay because they assumed I would. Because I always had. And here they were, trying to buy peace by cutting me out like a tumor. So I pulled the plug. I started with the insurance. Their health plan was under my corporate umbrella, listed as dependents through some HR loophole I exploited after Melissa's premiums tripled. I went into the portal, clicked terminate coverage, and confirmed it with a calmness that shocked even me. Next was the phone plan, 6 lines, all under my name. I hit cancel autopay, then scheduled the disconnection for December 1st, just in time for the holidays. The tuition took more steps. I had to log into the college portal, send an email, request that the spring semester payment be canceled. They'd still be enrolled for now, but once the school noticed the balance unpaid, that would change fast. Maybe they'd think it was a glitch. Maybe they'd assume I forgot. But they'd figure it out soon enough. And the thing is, I didn't do it out of spite. Not really. I did it because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't powerless. That I wasn't some pathetic ant they could bench until it was convenient to let me back in. I wasn't just some extra fork at the table. I had value. And now, they were going to feel it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever done everything for someone, gone out of your way, bent backwards, held your tongue when you should have screamed, only to realize they never respected you for it? That in fact, the more you gave, the less they saw you? If you have, tell me below. Because I'm still trying to understand how I got here, how I became the villain for finally drawing a line. I didn't sleep that night, not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I was finally wide awake to what I'd allowed for far too long. I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, staring at the family photo on my fridge, the one from 3 years ago where Melissa's smiling with her hand on my shoulder like we're best friends. I remembered that day. I'd just paid for her emergency dental work. She hadn't said thank you, just asked if I could cover it until Tom's bonus came through. The photo went into the trash. Not torn, not burned, just dropped in like any other piece of garbage I was done pretending had value. And the next morning, as the sun came up, I got an email from the school's financial office. Confirmation that the tuition had been pulled. No more anti-help. No more quiet sacrifices. Melissa wanted peace. Let's see how peaceful things get when the bills stop getting paid. There's something disturbingly satisfying about watching things fall apart when you're the one who held them together for far too long, especially when you've been doing it from the shadows, quietly, without recognition, without applause, just assuming the role of fixer because no one else would, and everyone else believed they were owed your labor by default. That second morning, after the initial switch flipping had been done and the digital dominoes were all lined up, I didn't feel remorse, not even a flicker of it. What I felt was something colder and far more dangerous, clarity. And I finally saw just how much they had taken from me, not just in money, but in peace, in dignity, in self-worth, until what was left of me was just a walking bank account with a polite smile and a seat at the kids' table. I started to make a list, not because I needed to keep track, but because I wanted to see it all in one place. There it was in black and white. Auto insurance premiums for 2 vehicles, paid every quarter for the past 4 years because Tom got laid off again. And Melissa didn't want to switch carriers. A family phone plan that included 6 active lines, one of which belonged to my mother and 2 others to teenagers who couldn't even be bothered to text me thank you after I sent them upgraded iPhones last Christmas. Health insurance coverage extended through my employer's open enrollment, which I risked disciplinary review to push through on a technicality, all to keep Melissa's copays manageable when Tom's new gig didn't come with benefits. And of course, the college tuition payments, paid directly to the registrar, never even acknowledged with a proper thank you, just assumed as part of what I, the responsible one, was supposed to do. The more I wrote, the more something old and dark and exhausted began to rise in me. Not rage, not sadness, but a kind of worn-down refusal to keep playing the role they had written for me. It wasn't enough anymore to feel hurt. Now I wanted them to feel it too, not in a vengeful, screaming from the rooftops kind of way, but in that slow, suffocating way you feel when the floor starts sinking beneath you and no one's throwing you a rope, because the one person who always did is finally walking away. I made calls, I sent emails, I prepared cancellations not for drama, but for precision. I scheduled the shutdown of the car insurance with a polite note to the agency. No longer financially responsible for these individuals, please notify them to secure independent coverage immediately. I removed myself from the shared Hulu and Netflix accounts. Petty maybe, but pointed. I even went into the kids' gaming subscriptions and canceled my card info, knowing full well how those minor conveniences they took for granted were all part of the web I had quietly spun to hold them together. One thread at a time, I unraveled it, not with cruelty, but with surgical detachment. The only thing I left untouched, for now, was the mortgage. Years ago, when Melissa and Tom's credit was in the toilet and they were about to lose the house, I co-signed to refinance, stupidly thinking it would be temporary, thinking it was what family does. I wasn't ready to pull that pin yet. Not because I was feeling merciful, but because timing matters in these things. And sometimes the real lesson isn't in the first fall. It's in realizing you're on your own while you're still halfway in the air. A week went by before anyone noticed. Melissa, in her usual chaos-brained way, had assumed that everything was on autopilot, that the world was still spinning on its axis because I kept cranking the lever. But by the time they landed in Colorado for the family holiday trip, the one I was excluded from, the one where they'd apparently have more peace without me, the first shoe had dropped. I know this because I got a panicked voicemail from Tom, not Melissa, at just after 10 at night. His voice was tight, strained, the way it always was when he had to pretend to be the calm one while Melissa spiraled in the background. "Hey, Lisa, sorry to bother you, but, we're at the airport rental desk, and they're saying the card isn't going through, and the insurance on the booking came back as invalid. Could you give me a call?" I didn't call him back, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I needed them to sit in that silence, in that uncertainty, to feel the exact kind of abandonment they'd practiced on me, thinking I'd never dare return the favor. I knew the moment they realized the coverage was gone, they'd scramble. Melissa would throw a tantrum, accuse the agent of making a mistake, and then call Mom, hoping for a solution. But Mom didn't have the money, and they all knew that. The real twist came 2 days later when the phone lines began to cut out. I'd scheduled the disconnection to hit in waves, first data throttling, then voicemail outages, then complete service termination. I pictured Aiden trying to live stream something dumb on YouTube, watching the screen buffer endlessly while Grace lost her mind not being able to check her DMs. I imagined Melissa sitting in the Airbnb, furious, humiliated, wondering how the holiday she orchestrated was turning into a logistical nightmare, all while sipping wine out of a seasonal mug that probably said something like thankful or family first. This wasn't revenge for not being invited. This was the reckoning for a decade of erasure, for every time they smiled in my face and resented the hand that fed them. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was simply reclaiming every inch of ground I had silently given away. By Friday, the group text lit up like a Christmas tree. Mom sent the first message. "Lisa, something's going on with the phones. Can you look into it?" Then Tom, "Not sure if you're traveling too, but we're having some weird issues. Let us know if you can check." Finally, Melissa chimed in. "Okay, this is ridiculous. Is this you? Because if it is, it's really immature." I read them all. Then I opened the family group chat, scrolled up slowly, taking in years of photos, jokes, birthday greetings, and veiled jabs, and then, without a word, I pressed leave conversation. Sometimes silence is louder than anything you could scream. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles in after you finally do the thing you always threatened to do only in your mind, the thing you fantasized about during sleepless nights and long car rides. That moment when you stop being the person everyone leans on and start being the person who lets them fall. Not out of malice, but out of a desperate, late-breaking commitment to your own survival. And in that quiet, something shifts, not just around Yipko, but within you. Like the tension in your chest finally stops buzzing even though the rest of the world begins to panic. That's what those first few days felt like after I left the group chat. After the services shut down and the lifelines dried up and nobody could pretend I was just being sensitive or dramatic or in a mood, because now the consequences had arrived. And they were expensive, inconvenient, and completely silent. The first actual call didn't come from Melissa. Of course not. She doesn't do confrontation unless she can win, unless there's an audience to cheer for her, unless she can weaponize her disappointment into guilt and shame and eventually submission. It came from Grace. A FaceTime no less, blurry, rushed, echoey, like she was in a crowded room. I didn't answer it. I watched it ring and then let it fade out. Because no 16-year-old who only calls you when the Wi-Fi goes out or she needs help with her FAFSA deserves to bypass the wall I had finally learned to build. A few minutes later, she followed up with a text. "Did you cancel everything? Mom's freaking out. I don't know what's going on. Please just say something." I stared at that message for longer than I cared to admit. Because it wasn't her fault. None of this was. Grace didn't ask to be born into a family where her mother treated financial dependency like a strategy and emotional manipulation like a second language. And as much as I wanted to protect her from all of it, as much as I loved her, God I really did. I couldn't keep being her safety net if doing so meant wrapping myself tighter in a role that was killing me. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened an old note on my phone, one I'd been keeping for years without realizing it had become a journal, a dumping ground for every slight, every petty injustice. Every time I bit my tongue and smiled, while Melissa blamed me for something that was her fault, or dismissed my help as unnecessary, only to beg for it again a month later. The note had entries like, Christmas 2019, paid for the whole meal, no one said thank you. In June 2021, Melissa said I was too intense after I reminded her Aiden had missed 2 tutoring sessions I paid for, and Mom told me not to make a fuss when they forgot my birthday. It wasn't a list of receipts. It was a list of erasures, a log of how many times I disappeared myself to make them more comfortable. So when Mom finally called me, because of course she would be the one to try to fix it, I let it ring, twice, 3 times. Eventually, I hit decline, not out of cruelty, but because I knew exactly what that conversation would sound like. She'd start with a soft tone, all warm and concerned, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if something had happened to make me act so uncharacteristically. Then she'd pivot, subtly at first, into suggesting that I was overreacting, that I'd hurt the kids, that Melissa was just trying her best, that this wasn't the way to handle things. And finally, she'd make it about her, as she always did, and I'd end the call feeling like a selfish, heartless monster for finally choosing myself. I wasn't ready to hear that narrative again. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and rewatched old home videos on my phone. Not the polished family holiday kind, but the raw clips I'd taken on random Tuesdays. Aiden doing cannonballs in my apartment pool, Grace baking brownies in my kitchen while covered in flour, even Melissa once, laughing so hard at some stupid movie we both loved that she snorted wine out of her nose. I watched them not to mourn what was lost, but to remind myself that my love had been real, that I hadn't imagined the effort, the care, the sacrifices. It wasn't bitterness that had brought me to this point. It was exhaustion, and still the messages kept coming, one after another, as if by sheer volume they could guilt me into picking up the pieces. Lisa, this is ridiculous. I can't believe you'd let your own family suffer like this. You've changed. That last one stung. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was I had changed. I was finally becoming the version of myself that I should have been years ago, someone who didn't confuse martyrdom with loyalty. By Sunday, they had to drive back early. The rental situation had turned into a mess, and with the phones down, Mom had missed her medication reminders and blamed the whole thing on the tension, as if my absence was the problem, not the fact that they engineered it. Melissa posted one of her classic passive-aggressive Instagram stories, some quote about cutting toxic people out of your life, with a filtered photo of the kids smiling over store-bought pie. The caption read, "Still grateful, even for the hard lessons." I didn't screenshot it, I didn't comment, I didn't roll my eyes. I just closed the app and sat in the quiet of my apartment, which for the first time in years felt like a sanctuary instead of a storage unit for someone else's drama. I made myself a late breakfast. I listened to jazz. I read a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. And for once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next crisis to crash through my phone screen. The fallout wasn't over. I knew that. Melissa wasn't the type to let go easily, and Mom had never met a mess she didn't try to mediate with guilt and emotional bargaining. But something fundamental had shifted. They were finally forced to see the architecture of their comfort and realize that I'd been the foundation all along. And now the house was shaking. It didn't happen the way I expected. Not with an explosion, not with slammed doors or screamed accusations flung across a driveway like shrapnel. Not even with Melissa showing up at my apartment ready to throw punches made of guilt and self-righteousness. No, the confrontation came 3 days after Thanksgiving, long enough for them to stew in the mess they'd refused to acknowledge as their own creation, long enough for Mom to work herself into a full-on emotional tailspin, and long enough for Melissa to realize that her usual tricks, her subtle gaslighting, her performative vulnerability, her expertly timed crocodile tears, weren't going to work on someone who had finally chosen silence over appeasement. The call came in around 2:30 in the afternoon, just as I was finishing up a report for a client and mentally preparing to meet a friend for drinks. A friend, by the way, who had told me years ago that I was letting my family bleed me dry, and whom I'd defended Melissa to more times than I could count. The caller ID said Mom, but when I picked up, it was Melissa's voice on the line, sharp and brittle, like glass under pressure. There was no greeting, no pretense, just 6 words spat out like poison. "What the hell is your problem?" I could have hung up. I should have hung up. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe a twisted sense of duty to hear her out one last time, kept the phone pressed to my ear. I said nothing. She filled the silence just like always, her voice climbing in pitch as the words poured out. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated the kids. Do you have any idea what you've done?" And just like that, I felt it, the shift. That subtle, almost imperceptible moment when you stop being afraid of the person who has controlled you for so long and realize that you hold the power now, not because you took it violently, but because you finally stopped giving it away. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I didn't apologize. I simply asked, with a steadiness that surprised even me, "What exactly did I do?" There was a beat of silence on her end, like she hadn't prepared for that question, like the script she'd written in her head didn't include me being calm. She stammered something about the phone plan and the insurance and how Mom had been really upset about not being able to get in touch with her doctor, as if I hadn't been covering that bill every month for the past 5 years, without a single word of thanks. And then she went for the jugular, the same tired tactic she always used when logic failed her. "You're punishing the kids. They didn't do anything to you. How dare you drag them into this?" And maybe that was the moment I realized just how deep the rot went, how thoroughly she had convinced herself that my role was to serve, to sacrifice, to step in and clean up whatever mess she made while being blamed for the stains. Because it wasn't about the kids. It had never been about them. It was about control, about her believing she could erase me from the parts of the family that mattered, while still expecting me to foot the bill for everything else. So I laid it out for her, not with anger, not with venom, but with the kind of surgical clarity that only comes from years of watching someone twist the truth. I told her that for over a decade, I had paid their bills, covered their emergencies, filled in every gap they created with their irresponsibility and pride. I reminded her of the late-night calls asking for just a little help, the sudden expenses that were always unexpected, the guilt trips wrapped in thank yous that never lasted more than a week. I told her that love isn't measured by how much you give until you break, and that I had reached my limit, not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about myself. She didn't take it well. The yelling started then, a flurry of insults and accusations and half-formed memories twisted to make me the villain. I let her rant, let her spit every ounce of entitlement she'd bottled up since the day I stopped playing the game. And when she finally paused to catch her breath, I told her the one thing she never expected to hear. "You wanted peace, Melissa. You said it yourself. You wanted a holiday without me so you could have peace. And that's exactly what I gave you. Peace from my money, peace from my help, peace from me. So why are you calling?" There was another pause. Then she hung up. It would have ended there, probably, if Tom hadn't called an hour later. His voice was quieter, less angry, more resigned. He tried to take the middle road, to play diplomat, to acknowledge that maybe things got out of hand and that no one meant to hurt you, Lisa, and that Melissa was just under a lot of stress. I listened. I let him talk. And then I told him something that, in hindsight, should have been said years ago. "You know what the real problem is, Tom? You keep treating Melissa's behavior like a storm you can't predict, like something that just happens and you're powerless to stop it. But it's not weather, it's a choice. And every time you protect her from the consequences, you make that choice easier for her." He didn't argue. Before he hung up, he said something that caught me off guard, something that felt more honest than anything Melissa had screamed. "They're not going to bounce back from this, Lisa. You know that, right?" And maybe he was right. Maybe the bridge was gone, burned beyond repair. Maybe I'd finally crossed the line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one bleeding from 1,000 tiny cuts. While smiling through dinner, I was the one holding the lighter. There's something almost surreal about the first quiet morning after years of noise. The kind of noise that isn't just audible but psychological, emotional, ever-present in the way guilt lingers in your chest. In the way you always expect your phone to light up with another emergency, another request, another manipulation veiled in a polite, familial tone that says, "We're only asking because we know you'll say yes." That morning, the one following the final confrontation, I woke up to no messages, no missed calls, no buzzing notifications begging me to fix something or someone. And while the silence felt foreign at first, like stepping into a house you used to live in but haven't visited for years, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, watching the machine rumble and hiss like it had all the time in the world, because it did. And for once, so did I. I stood at the window, looking out over the neighborhood that had always felt more like a storage facility for other people's drama than a home of my own, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I had done this. Just stood still, just breathed, just existed without some version of Melissa's voice, or Mom's passive guilt, or one of the kids' indirect needs echoing in my mind, like a to-do list disguised as love. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't even pretend to be productive. I let the day stretch out in front of me like an open road and told myself quietly, honestly, that I had nowhere to be and no one to save. It felt strange, that lack of urgency, like I was detoxing from a drug I didn't realize I'd been addicted to, being needed. The next few days passed in a kind of suspended animation. Melissa didn't call again, neither did Tom. The group chat remained deleted, a ghost in my phone I didn't dare resurrect. Mom tried once more, left a voicemail this time, her voice trembling with carefully constructed heartbreak, saying she hoped I was okay, that she didn't understand why I was doing this, that family should stick together, and then, as expected, the sigh, the pause, the gentle accusation wrapped in maternal concern. "I just wish you'd talk to us, instead of shutting us out." I didn't respond, because I had talked. I had spoken plainly and clearly, not just with words, but with actions, and what they heard, what they always heard, was not the content, but the tone, not the message, but the challenge it posed to their comfortable version of reality. And the truth was, I wasn't shutting anyone out. I was finally closing a door they had walked through too many times without wiping their feet. And then, just when I thought the silence might finally settle into something permanent, something stable and maybe even peaceful, I found the letter. It was folded neatly and left inside my mailbox without a stamp, slipped between a stack of junk coupons and a credit card offer like something sacred hiding in the mundane. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, graces, looping and slightly messy, the way most 16-year-olds write when they're still deciding if cursive is something worth caring about. I took it inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time, unsure whether I wanted to read it at all, unsure whether I could carry whatever weight was waiting inside without undoing all the boundaries I had just begun to build. But I opened it. The letter was short, maybe 2 paragraphs, but it hit harder than anything Melissa had screamed or Tom had confessed or Mom had tried to smooth over with her careful, condescending concern. Grace wrote that she didn't understand everything that had happened, that she wasn't sure who was right or wrong, but that she missed me. She said the house felt different now, colder, like everyone was pretending to be fine while walking on eggshells, and she asked if I was okay. Not in a demanding way, not in a guilt-laced way, but like a kid who genuinely cared. She ended it with a line that stuck with me more than any therapy session ever had. "I don't need you to fix everything. I just want to know you're still there." I folded the letter back up slowly, with hands that were shaking more than I'd admit. And I didn't cry, not right away. I sat there for a long time, letting the silence wrap around me like a heavy blanket, and thought about what it meant to love someone without letting them consume you. Because for years, I'd believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing, that to love was to give until it hurt, and that setting boundaries was selfish, cruel even. But now I saw it differently. Love without boundaries is just self-destruction wearing a halo. I didn't write Grace back. Not immediately. I wasn't ready to re-enter that world, not even through her. But I left the letter on my nightstand, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that didn't require me to martyr myself. And then 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Mom. Not a text, not a voicemail, a live call, just her name flashing on the screen, familiar and loaded and pulsing like a wound. I let it ring, once, twice, a third time. I watched the screen fade to black, then very slowly, very deliberately, I picked up the phone, walked it into the bedroom, set it face down on the dresser, and turned it off. Because silence isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's freedom.